The sky over occupied France was a hunting ground for the young men of the United States Army Air Forces. Every mission was a gamble with fate, a test of skill, courage, and sheer luck against a determined and deadly enemy. On one such mission, a lone B-17 Flying Fortress, a titan of the air now rendered vulnerable, found itself in a fight for its very existence. An engine was on fire, crippling the aircraft and drawing enemy fighters like sharks to blood. The 10 men inside faced a seemingly inevitable end. This is the story of that crew, that bomber, and the single, fateful decision made by their pilot. A decision that would mean the difference between life and death for the 9 men who relied on him. When his B-17 lost an engine over France, this pilot's decision saved 9 men. Our story unfolds on a crisp morning, October 14th, 1943. The target for the day was the heavily defended Schweinfurt ball-bearing plants in Germany. A target so deep in enemy territory that it was known as a black hole mission due to the staggering losses expected. Among the vast armada of B-17s droning through the cold air was the Duchess, a fortress of the 360th Bomb Squadron, 303rd Bomb Group, based out of Molesworth, England. The controls were First Lieutenant John Jack Morgan, a 24-year-old pilot from Illinois. Beside him sat his co-pilot, Second Lieutenant Robert Bob Daniels. In the cockpit, these 2 men were the brain and nerve center of a 10-man crew, a microcosm of America itself. There was the navigator, Lieutenant Harris, plotting their perilous course, the bombardier, Lieutenant Schmidt, who would soon be hunched over the Norden bomb site, and the 6 enlisted men who formed the backbone of the aircraft's defense, the gunners. Men like Staff Sergeant Michael O'Reilly in the top turret, Sergeant James Kowalski manning the lethal ball turret that hung precariously beneath the fuselage. They were boys from farms, cities, and small towns, now entrusted with a multi-million-dollar war machine in each other's lives. The strategic importance of the Schweinfurt raid was immense. By destroying Germany's primary source of ball bearings, the Allies hoped to cripple their entire war machine, from tanks to aircraft. But the German High Command knew this too. The route to Schweinfurt and back was a gauntlet of flak concentrations and predetermined interception points for the lethal Luftwaffe. The success of the mission and the survival of the men hinged on the tight formation of the bomber boxes, creating a mutually supportive web of .50 caliber fire. To stray from this protective herd was a death that Duchess Asterisk and her group had successfully weathered the initial flak belts, the black puffs of smoke staining the sky around them. The constant crump-crump of the explosions sent shudders through the airframe. Inside, the crew was bundled in their electrically heated suits, the air thick with the smell of sweat, cordite, and cold metal. The interphone was quiet, save for the occasional terse report from a gunner scanning the empty blue. That emptiness was an illusion. Fighters. 11 o'clock high, Mi-19s. The call from the nose gunner shattered the tense calm. A swarm of sleek, deadly Messerschmitt Bf-19s dove on the formation, their 20mm cannons and machine guns blinking with lethal intent. The air erupted into chaos. The deafening roar of the B-17's own .50 caliber machine guns joined the fray, the sound of physical force pounding in the men's ears. Tracers crisscrossed the sky in a deadly ballet. The Duchess Asterisk shuddered as enemy fire found its mark. Left waist to pilot, we've taken a hit in number 3. Looks okay, just a coolant leak, reported Sergeant Evans. The initial damage seemed minor, manageable. The formation pressed on, dropping its payload on the target through a maelstrom of flak that turned the sky black. Now, they had to make the long turn for home. By 1400 hours, they were crossing back into French airspace, but the ordeal was far from over. The Luftwaffe, having intercepted the outbound stream, was now waiting for the wounded and the stragglers on the return route. A second wave of fighters, Focke-Wulf FW-190s this time, pounced. These were heavier, more heavily armed than the 19As, and they attacked with ruthless efficiency. It was during this second brutal engagement that disaster struck the Duchess. AFW-190, making a high-speed pass from the front quarter, raked the bomber's nose and left wing with cannon fire. The sound was different this time, A sickening thump, 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 followed by an immediate and violent shudder through the airframe. Pilot 2, crew, report damage. The response was immediate and grim. Top turret here, sir. Number 2 engine is streaming coolant and... Wait, I see smoke. Confirmed, number 2 engine is on fire. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped the men in the cockpit. A burning engine on a B-17 was one of the most dreaded scenarios. It could quickly spread to the fuel tanks in the wings, or cause the wing itself to fold. The standard drilled into them procedure was to shut down the engine, feather the propeller to reduce drag, and hit the fire extinguisher. Morgan and Daniels went through the drill with practice speed. The engine was feathered, the fire bottle discharged. For a moment they dared to hope, but the hope was short-lived. The fire, fed by leaking oil and fuel, refused to die. Orange flames, fanned by the 180-mile-per-hour slipstream, began to lick hungrily at the wing's leading edge. The drag from the dead, feathered propeller and the raging fire was immense, causing the bomber to yaw violently to the left. Morgan and Daniels strained at the controls, their muscles corded, fighting to keep the 30-ton aircraft level. They were losing altitude, slowly but inexorably. The formation, the source of their protection, began to pull away. They were alone. Fighters. 3 o'clock level. They're lining up for another pass. The voice from the right waist gunner was tight with panic. 2 more FW-190s, seeing the wounded giant falling behind, swooped in for the kill. The Duchess was a sitting duck. This was the moment every airman feared. The crisis was absolute. The B-17 was crippled, on fire, and alone over hundreds of miles of hostile territory. With the formation now just a speck on the horizon, the protective umbrella of collective firepower was gone. The 2 FW-190s made their passes, their cannon shells tearing new holes in the fuselage and tail section. The radio was shot out. The oxygen system was failing, forcing the crew to descend into the thicker, but more dangerous air where German light flak guns waited. Inside the Duchies, the situation was dire. The fire in the number 2 engine was spreading, threatening the integrity of the entire wing. The acrid smell of burning metal and rubber filled the aircraft. The noise was a hellish symphony, the roar of the 3 remaining engines, the scream of the wind through damaged control surfaces, the staccato chatter of the gunners desperately trying to fend off their attackers, and the ominous crackle of the fire. Tail gunner to pilot. I can see the spar through the wing. The fire's eating into the main wing spar. This was the worst news possible. The main spar was the structural backbone of the wing. If it failed, the wing would simply snap off, condemning the aircraft to a fatal spinning plunge. The interphone became a chorus of damage reports, each one painting a grimmer picture. The ball turret was jammed, trapping Kowalski inside. The left waist gunner had a superficial wound from shrapnel. Hydraulic fluid was leaking from a ruptured line. They were losing the battle. Lieutenant Morgan now faced an impossible choice, a decision that would define him and determine the fate of his crew. The drill book procedure was clear. When an aircraft is critically damaged and cannot make it back to friendly territory, the pilot gives the order to bail out. It was the only logical choice. To stay with the aircraft was almost certainly to die, but to give that order was to consign his men to capture, or worse. The gunners, especially Kowalski and the ball turret, would have to evacuate under fire. Parachuting into occupied France was a lottery. Some airmen evaded capture, but many spent the rest of the war in Stalag Luft camps. Morgan looked at his co-pilot, Daniels, whose face was pale but set with determination. He thought of Kowalski, trapped and helpless in his glass cage beneath the plane. He thought of all 9 men whose lives were his responsibility. The logical, by-the-book decision was to abandon ship, but something in him rebelled against it. "We're not bailing out," Morgan said, his voice surprisingly calm over the interphone. "I'm going to try something." The decision was insane. It defied all logic and training. But Morgan had remembered something, a piece of flying lore, a last-ditch maneuver discussed in hushed tones by veteran pilots in the officers' club. It was a Hail Mary pass, a move born of desperation. His plan was to use the very thing that was trying to kill them, the fire, to their advantage. He knew that with the number 2 engine feathered and burning, the asymmetric drag was pulling them into a left-hand death spiral. To counter this, he and Daniels were already applying full right rudder and aileron. Fighting the controls with every ounce of their strength, it was a battle they were losing. Morgan's gambit was to increase power on the number 4 engine. It's the outboard engine on the right wing. The theory was brutal in its simplicity. Use asymmetric thrust to fight asymmetric drag. But the execution was excruciating. Pushing the throttle forward on the number 4 engine increased the strain on the airframe exponentially. The entire B-17 shuddered and,